It looks more complicated, but it's not. It looks like more work. It's actually less. Here's why I stopped using seed trays, and just to be clear, it's not just about seedlings being root bound. The first annoyance with seed trays is that good ones cost a lot of money. So if you want good seed trays that'll last you season after season, they are quite the investment up front. And if you don't want to make that investment up front, you need to settle for some of the cheaper ones. And with the cheap ones, they will rip and tear after only a season or two of use. Then you'll have to go out and assess, are you ready to buy the expensive ones so that you can reuse them season after season? Or are you going to buy cheap ones again and just repeat the cycle? And then there's storage. When it comes to physical objects, I am not the most organized person. And seed trays are a pain in the butt to store. Because they're set sizes of 24 or 72, they don't fit together. So you need separate piles. And if you have a menagerie of different seed trays from different companies, they don't necessarily stack well together. You end up with this big area you need to have available to store the seed trays when they're not in use. And then there's the cleaning. After you've done transplanting everything, or before you start seeds the next season, you need to take the time and individually wash every single one of the individual seed trays. It's good practice to start with clean tools. But cleaning a seed tray is about as much fun as cleaning a muffin pan, except you don't get the nice silicone liners to make your job easier. And if you're like me and have only really purchased the cheap seed trays, in the process of washing them, you will probably rip them. I don't know about you, but after going through the effort of transplanting something, the last thing I want to do is clean all the seed trays. So I've been shoving them in the basement until next seed starting season. And then when it's time to start the next seeds, instead of just taking the few minutes it would take to start the seeds, I now have to clean the seed trays. And the most annoying part of seed trays for me is when the seedlings won't come out of the seed trays. The amount of times that I have ripped seedlings completely apart, separated them from their roots, trying to get them out of the individual cell, there's nothing worse than spending months raising these seedlings and then not being able to get them into the ground because they are stuck in the seed trays. And I know there's different tips on how to loosen them. I just don't want to deal with that hassle. It has burnt me one too many times that it just infuriates me even looking at the seed trays these days. So after a few seasons of wrestling seed trays, I decided there had to be a better way. And that's when I decided to switch to soil blockers. I like to use a 2-inch soil blocker instead of the little tiny individual soil blockers because I find that most seedlings can stay in those 2-inch soil blocks until it's ready for transplant time. In those tiny little soil blocks, you have to transplant to bigger soil blocks fairly quickly after germination. I don't find that I start such a large volume of plants that starting in the tiny itsy bitsy soil blocks is really that much of a space saver. I'd rather just start in the 2-inch soil blocks from the beginning. And if I do find that the seedling has outgrown the 2-inch soil block, it's easy to just pop that big soil block into either an individual pot or to make balls, bigger soil balls around that 2-inch soil block. What I use to put my soil blocks on is a short 10-20 tray that you'll see often for microgreens. I like the short sides because I find it's easier to use the soil blocker in there and it's easier to get the seedlings out after. You don't have to wrestle the sides to get that first one out. It's very easy to just reach and grab the soil block. What I love about this system is that it's very compact. All of the 10-20 trays fit together and stack in one neat stack. And the soil blocker isn't very big. It can sit just right on top of them. I also like that I can make as many or as few soil blocks I need for each crop. With seed starting trays, you're limited to how many cells are in that seed tray. So if you want to start 8 cabbages, but the smallest seed tray you have available is 24, well, you either need to mix your varieties and do half cabbage and half tomatoes, which I find sometimes can be iffy with growth. The tomatoes are going to be much taller than the cabbage, so your cabbage could end up being leggy while your tomatoes are burning because they're too close to the lights. Or you have to start an excess of something. You don't have that problem with soil blocks. You can start as many or as little soil blocks as you want. I quite enjoy having that flexibility and freedom because there are certain crops like broccoli that I want a large amount of. I think I'm starting over 60 plants this year. Then there's crops like kale where I'm probably only going to start 2 or 3 plants. Soil blocks gives me the flexibility to do that without wasting any space under my grow lights. You aren't even limited to the amount of 10-20 trays you have with soil blocks. All you need is some flat, hard, shallow surface to put a soil block on, and you can make more soil blocks once you have the soil blocker. Which means if you think you've underplanted your garden in the spring and want to start more seedlings in the fall, you aren't limited by the number of seed trays that you have purchased. One of my favorite things about the soil blocker is how easy it's all to clean. You can just rinse the soil blocker off when you're done using it and let it air dry so it doesn't rust. And then the 10-20 trays are just a quick wipe down. You don't have to fight with the individual cells. Plants also do better for me in the soil blocks than they have in the seed trays. I'm sure this has to do with the air pruning benefits of soil blocks and the fact that I think there's more soil volume in the soil blocks than in a lot of the seed trays. For something like broccoli in particular, that does not like to get root bound. If you get a root bound seedling, you're going to get much smaller heads. Soil blocks are amazing for that because your seedling can't get root bound. The soil blocks also tend to dry out a little faster, which if you're an overwaterer of your plants, that can be helpful. Soil blockers also use far less plastic. You don't even need to use plastic 10-20 trays if you don't want to. You can use anything that is water safe as a base for your soil blocks. So if you have a ceramic serving tray, you could use that. I've seen people use different acrylic options. World's your oyster in that department as long as it's strong enough to hold the soil blocks and can retain a little bit of water for watering. So if you really want to go plastic free in your garden, soil blocks are a much better option than seed trays. Because even if you buy good seed trays, they're going to be made out of plastic. There's limited options on non-plastic seed starting trays. And this one's personal. I think making soil blocks is much funner than filling seed trays. A lot of the times when you're starting seedlings, it's in the dead of winter or when it's still cold outside and the ground's still frozen and you can't go and play in the dirt. Well, making soil blocks allows you to play with the dirt a little bit more than just filling seed trays. I think it's very satisfying to fill up the soil blocker and press those soil blocks out. It's like making little sculptures of soil each time you do it. And making soil blocks isn't as complicated as others make it look. As long as you're using a seed starting mix that doesn't have large chunks of wood or other debris in it, and you're mixing it with water to a consistency that is wetter than what you would use to fill soil trays, you'll probably have decent luck. If you've never made soil blocks before, it's easier than it looks. Let me show you how I do it. Start with a good seed starting mix. Here I'm using ProMix brand, but the key is just to not have any large chunks in the mix. Then you'll want to add water, a lot more water than you think you need. You'd rather have the mix on the wet side than on the dry side. You can see when I squeeze the soil, water runs through. It's not the damp sponge consistency that you would use for filling seed trays. Then it's time to start filling the soil blocker. I like to do this by walking the soil blocker through the seed starting mix. This allows me to really compact that soil into the soil blocker. A mistake I think a lot of first-time soil blockers make is that they don't compress the soil in the soil blocker enough. Now the fun part, pushing them out. To get the blocks out of the soil blocker, you need to push down on the handle with the spring and pull up on the bar at the same time. The handle with the spring is pushing the soil blocks out while you're pulling up on the bar is lifting the metal mold up. It'll feel a little awkward the first few times you do it, but with practice, it becomes second nature. You just continue walking that soil blocker, filling it up and pressing out your cubes until you have enough soil blocks to sow your desired crop. It's really not as difficult as some people make it seem. And as long as you don't have any big chunks or sticks getting in the way, I think you're going to find this process a lot of fun. The only crops I will not be using soil blocks for is my bulbing onions. And the only reason I'm not using soil blocks for that is that I like to multi-sow them, and soil blocks aren't ideal for that method. And that's why I don't use seed trays anymore. Soil blocks fit the way I garden better. It stores better, it's easier at transplant time, and I can decide if I want 8 seedlings or 60 seedlings. And more importantly, it removes friction. Because when you're trying to grow a lot of food, the small annoyances really add up. In my next video, I'm going to share what took my harvest from 420 pounds of food in 2024 to 520 pounds of food in 2025, and where I expect the increases for 2026.